Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name's Scott Maier. This is Drawing Together with Artists Network, where we meet every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern to draw together. If you are new to this show, this is all about us finding a subject to draw every week that is designed to move us forward in some way. We're trying to develop our skills as artists. So I pick a new subject. We try to analyze it, break down the process, and think about ways that it can kind of move us forward in our artistic practice, help us with our drawing, help us with our painting, etc. So if you want to follow along, you can find a link to the reference image in the description below, and you'll also find a link to the show page on Artist Network where you can share your work when you're done. So we have viewers from all over the world, so many familiar names. I love that there's so many of you that have been with us for almost the 2 years that we've been ongoing with this. So yeah, this totally makes me want to go to Italy. I'm going to show you what we're working on right now. So as you can tell by the title of the show, what we're going to be working on is this canal scene. So this is a preparatory sketch that I put together, and I want to talk a little bit about it. Again, you can find that reference image that's below me. You can find the full-size image in the description below. You can also find the materials that I'll be using. I'm using different materials today, and I'm trying out a different approach in general. I found myself kind of following the same basic structure. It's hard to break habits when we're working. And throughout this process here, you're going to see me making many decisions that I would normally make, but I'm also trying to hopefully kind of discover something about the materials and discover something new about the process. So what I tried here is to really keep my marks moving more quickly, treat it more like a quote-unquote sketch, in the idea that it's a kind of a quick capturing of a scene. I'm trying to imagine myself being on location when I don't have a lot of time to capture a scene like this. And I also want to kind of play around with new materials and play around with a new approach. So hopefully that will make sense as we go along, because it doesn't look a whole lot different. It's a little bit looser than I might normally draw for the show here. But something that I just want to keep in mind as I'm working is to keep the pace of the marks going. And I'm doing that because it helps me to it's going to affect the processing of the information. And it's going to affect how I react to the things that I'm observing, and it might influence how I actually observe things. So that's kind of what I'm doing, but this is all about us drawing together, and you may have an entirely different approach. You may have an entirely different set of media that you're working with. The paper today I'm working with is, I believe this is the Somerset rag, if I remember. So this is a cotton rag paper. This is a gray toned paper, and I can bring up a strip of white paper. You can see by the contrast here that this is just slightly darker in value. And that will allow me to use some of this white pencil. So I have this set of these Jerry's Artarama jumbo pencils. These are a lot of fun to work with. These are they're impregnated with oil. So it's like an oil and charcoal mixture, and they float on the page a little bit differently than regular charcoal or graphite. And I really wanted to try a different material to help, again, force me into different mark making and a different approach to drawing, to see if that is the case. The size of the paper I'm using is a little bit larger. Gosh, I can't remember, but this is about 11 by 13, if I remember correctly. So the image that you're going to find is sized to about an 8 by 10. This adheres to that same aspect ratio. It's the same proportional dimension, but it's just a little bit larger, and that's going to help facilitate kind of larger, more expressive movements in the work today. All right, Leslie, looks like you already have gray tone paper, so that's awesome. Again, if you don't have these materials, that's totally fine. Hopefully what we're going to be talking about will apply to just about any media. This is my Derwent retractable eraser that I have shaved down to a chisel tip to give me a sharp point. I have my Kneaded eraser, and that's it. Oh, and I have my paper towel to smudge things. I don't have the blending stump today. I'm going to see what happens with that. So now what I wanted to do is, again, by going with kind of a bigger material, I have these sharpened down pretty well, but I've got quite a bit of the core exposed. and I wanted to work on a larger size, again, to kind of open up my mark making a little bit. And I'd like to do kind of less erasing, I think, than normally. So let me see how this goes. So this material it's not really, it doesn't really feel like charcoal. It feels more like a Conte, or kind of almost like a really soft colored pencil in a way. There's a really interesting quality to it. I have the small thumbnail in front of me right below me on the screen here. That's what I'm going to look at. And I also have the large one up here on my left. One thing I forgot to mention, if you're new and you're wondering what the heck is going on, we'll be drawing for a couple hours, maybe an hour and a half or so, up to about 2 hours. Feel free to share any thoughts, comments, observations, questions. If you have a question for me that you'd like me to answer, if you type it in all caps, it helps me identify it. And if I do miss one of your questions, please ask it again to make sure I get it. So, all right, let's get to it. One of the things that we've talked about in the past is that the idea of that all drawing is essentially gesture drawing. We're starting with a gesture, we're continuing to refine it as we go. And I want that quality in the work today. And I wish I had a reason that was deep and thoughtful and profound and made me look like a tremendous artist, but I really don't have a reason. It's just how I feel today. So that's what's going on. So I'm just simply reacting to the work. Part of this is inspired by watching Debbie Caspery draw in our Illuminate event last week, where she was, as a field artist, reacting to so many things in the environment. And I'll kind of talk through kind of my general approach. So I'm going to talk through this approach, and then you have 10 seconds of silence. So I'm sorry about that. You can see that I'm holding the pencil really far back. I'm using this kind of knuckle to kind of float on the page, so it gives me a little of stability. And all I have to do is just kind of roll my wrist a little bit, and it applies a little pressure at the end. And that allows me to kind of float over the page and kind of test out the movement a little bit. This is the brown one, brown jumbo pencil, which is a little bit lighter in value. And then I have my white and my black, this jet black that I'll be bringing in on top. So this is a little bit lighter in value, which will hopefully kind of work out as, hopefully work out in the end, so that it'll be kind of hidden by the black charcoal or the black jumbo pencil. The question here is: the pencil light compressed charcoal? It's not really light compressed charcoal. I guess it's somewhat similar. It's just a softer. Like I said, it's a little bit more oily. You can really feel the oil in it, similar to a kind of a wax crayon or some colored pencils. But what you're going to notice here is that it actually lifts off the page pretty nicely. I didn't put very much pressure on that, and it lifts up most of the material there. But there's nothing really dusty about it, which is really nice. So let me think. I want to, as I'm going through, I'm kind of reacting without thinking a whole lot. This isn't about following a specific procedure and saying that we always start with the shadows or always start with a line, etc. This is kind of reacting to where my mind goes, where my eye is drawn. And sometimes I'm thinking about establishing the form of this gondola more linearly, looking at the contour, looking at the placement of it. Sometimes I'm thinking about it in terms of shape. And I'm going to play around with it. And part of what I want to kind of experience a little bit today is a certain amount of fearlessness. which is a little intimidating when you're doing things live because I want to make this look awesome for anybody who's watching, but I also have to risk it falling apart. That's what drawing is all about, is it kind of embracing the sense of discovery about the subject, about yourself, about the materials, something about the art making process in general. There's so much that's exciting to discover when we draw. Okay, so our general the general kind of approach that I'm using is my eyes are all over the place right now. So I'm looking back and forth. I'm looking at the big one. I'm looking at the small thumbnail. I'm looking at the drawing. I'm looking at the drawing in front of me, and doing a lot of indirect gazes. So if you're new to the show and you haven't heard that term yet, what I'm thinking about is looking in one location but putting my awareness on something else. So as I'm looking at the small thumbnail on the screen, I'm splitting my attention to some degree and paying attention to what's happening in my peripheral vision on the page. So that's so that in a way, kind of in the mind, things are merging together. One of the things that is helpful in doing a preparatory drawing like I had done is that it I'm more familiar with this subject, and so I am at a bit of an advantage because I've already spent some time with this subject, but it was actually quite a while ago, and I've forgotten a lot of the things that I studied in terms of proportion, etc. Let me adjust the exposure a little bit, darken it. That's a bit more accurate. Ramirez saying is maybe some sort of Verithin pencil, a combination of wax and graphite mix. Yeah, this is what they say on the website is that it's a mixture of charcoal and oil. So it's a charcoal, but it's got this, they say it's impregnated with oil. I don't know exactly how they do that or if there's a specific oil binder that they're using, but it's actually a lot of fun. I do like the balance in it. It's very smooth, but I do like that it can lift, and it's also hard enough to retain an edge. All right, so this first step is just kind of connecting my mind and body a little bit, kind of bringing things together. Now I'm shrinking things a little bit. I notice, you can see there's more space on the left and the right, more space on top and bottom than what I'm seeing in the photo, and part of that is because of how it's framed on the screen here, and so I have to ask myself kind of early on if that's okay, and I think it is. So I'm just kind of making some mental notes here. And I really want the gesture of this man here to be a primary focal point. And I said that specifically, the gesture, because I want that to be top of mind for me, the gestural quality. And what I mean by that is it can be somewhat confusing sometimes using that term gesture. Well, we kind of know a gesture drawing when we see it, but it can also be kind of confusing sometimes to define what a gesture is truly recording. For me, a gesture is about capturing some sort of inherent quality in the work and allowing the marks to express, again, something about the way an object fills the space, whether it's moving, whether it's static, whether it's a very rigid and firm angular object, whether it's soft and atmospheric or grainy, what are the textural qualities, what is the structural quality, and you're trying to capture all of that in essentially as few marks as possible. And it's a reaction to those things. And you'll be surprised if you haven't spent much time working gesturally, how much information you can really convey through a quick gesture. If your mind is locked on to a particular quality about the subject, about its form, about its texture, something will be conveyed about that in the marks that you make. It's like body language that you can't ignore when you're communicating with somebody. So when I'm approaching a gesture, there are kind of two ways that you can think about it. There's contour and shape in terms of gesture, and when you're thinking about the shape, sometimes what you might look for is a bit of the inner axis. So if I look at the angle of the leg, for example, finding that inner axis and indicating it on the page to give you some sort of guide. You might also stick kind of purely to the contour marks. This is what we saw a lot in the Degas drawing, is his really profound ability at capturing the gesture of a figure through really specific contour marks. So he wasn't looking for some sort of internal armature that he built the figure around. But I've seen gestures done in a number of ways, and I guess I want to just put that out there because you'll find your own connection with the gesture drawing process. In terms of like, what information do you really feel like you need to capture? Do you feel like you need some sort of internal armature? Do you think you could tackle the contour right away? Do you want to create it more based on shape by using the broad side of the pencil? And I think what I'm drawn to most in the quality of gestural works is that it feels like there's just a shorter distance between the marks and the mind of the artist. You'll see marks that sometimes make no sense, right? And that indicates to me that it's kind of a bit of a release valve for the artist to kind of just let loose and create a mark that maybe doesn't reference anything specific in the subject. But sometimes when you're looking really intently at a subject, it can get a little overwhelming, and you need to just kind of take a little break. But your arm is in movement, in motion, and sometimes that falls out of sync, where your brain says, "All right, I need you to stop," but your arm's still flying around. Peter is asking a question: if I always tape my drawings down. I do for the purposes of this show, but I do not when I draw on my own. This I really only tape down for the show. Outside of this, I don't really ever tape down the work. So if you look at my preparatory drawing, you can see there's no tape lines there. And this allowed me to kind of rotate it, twist and contort it, make it a little bit easier. This is a bit more confining because, especially with the curves at this angle, I can't rotate the paper to accommodate the natural motion of my arm and wrist. So I just have to figure out a way to do that. Okay, so in general, we've talked about this before, the general process. So drawing is a set of decisions that you make about the subject, about the materials, about the process, about the way in which you break down materials. Break down the subject using the materials that you have. In the book that I wrote, in See, Think, Draw, I kind of break down the drawing process into essentially 4 main steps. You're starting with a gesture. You move into measuring and adjusting the proportions using angle sighting, comparative measuring, and other tools. Move on to kind of refining the form and then finishing with the details. And I'm bringing that up because what I'm intentionally trying to do here is move fluidly between those stages. That's part of the objective of loosening up, is to not fall into a predictable set of motions and a predictable process for analyzing the subject, and instead react to the form and let that come through in the drawing as it does. So really the gesture and the measurements are going to be happening all at one time. So for example, as I look at the shadow line in the water here, I'm doing some quick check-ins to see where I am relative to this end of the gondola. Where does that shadow pass through this end of the gondola? How does it bisect the figure here? What is the relationship between this long oar and that shadow? And as I'm starting to think about the placing of the figure, I'm moving very quickly, but I'm doing a quick check-in to look at the negative space here, the negative space here, the height of the belt. This becomes a nice landmark here that I can use and relate to these other elements. And as with every drawing that we talk about in this show, there is part of your artistic signature in each drawing will be in the level of refinement of the forms, and essentially how detailed do you want it to be. And it's helpful to have some sort of framework established before you start a drawing to know really how far you want to take the drawing. Jerry's just joined. Are you kidding me? Jerry's Artarama. These are the jumbo pencils. They're awesome. Thanks so much for joining. Thank you for sharing the link to the book there, Jen. If anybody wants to check it out, it's available for pre-order, but doesn't come out until June in print. But a lot of what I talk about in the book was formed throughout the kind of creation of this show and working with you all, is thinking through, really if I could break down the drawing process as simply as possible, and in a way that allows artists to build a healthy habit and a practice for drawing, then what would that curriculum look like? And that's what formed the book, because so much of your knowledge of drawing will come through you working regularly. You're going to take a class, you're going to learn some fundamentals, but it's not a linear progression in development as an artist. You don't start at one spot, as a beginner and end at a master. You start at one spot and you just keep building and expanding your awareness of those fundamentals that you develop. Right? It's about expansion rather than linear progression. And so in order to expand as an artist, you give yourself challenges. Sometimes you learn when to take the time to really refine the craft, and then sometimes you want to break things and try something entirely new. We're going to be talking about that in the next Illuminate event with a pastel artist named Terry Ford. That's going to be the main topic. And what Illuminate is, it's a members-only event for Artist Network, paid members. It's a artist discussion and demo online through live Zoom that I host. So much fun. All right. So there is something and kind of inherent in the pace of your marks that can be really helpful. All right. So to get back to the topic of gestures and why they can be so valuable, is a gesture is a drawing. Right? It incorporates so many things: line, shape, value, form, sometimes texture. You're dealing with proportions, you're dealing with composition, but often it's very quick. And so I tell people who ask me, what's the best way to get better? How do I best use my time to improve my drawing skills? And I would say, if you have unlimited time, then do it all, right? But most of us don't have unlimited time. We are very limited by our schedule. So if you are limited by your schedule and you want to improve your skills, what is going to give you the most bang for your buck? I would put a lot of emphasis on gesture drawing. So what you might do is set some parameters there where you say, well, I'm going to do, my gesture drawings are only going to be 30 seconds long or maybe 1 minute long. Nothing too long where you start to really refine, and give yourself the goal of creating hundreds and hundreds of drawings. You think you're only doing 30 seconds each drawing. 100 drawings is you'll achieve that very quickly. As an example, in one of my classes when I was at art school, we had to do a 2-week assignment for a final project, and I had done a number of these really large, elaborate drawings that took 2 weeks working every day to try to get this thing done, and I didn't want to do that again. I was really excited about gestural work, and so luckily I had a professor who was accommodating and allowed me to, for my final, fill two whole sketchbooks with gesture drawings. And I would go to the airport when security wasn't as bad. I would go to the mall. I'd go to the bus station. I would just go outside this is out in Baltimore. And I would just sit and draw people as they walk by. So at most, you have about 5 seconds to capture the gesture of somebody. And the first half of the first sketchbook was scribbles. It was nothing. You could kind of say, though, there's a figure here, a figure there, but it was not a whole lot. After a while, though, I really got into the flow, and I started to create marks that not only looked like people, but they looked like specific people. They captured the quality of looking at somebody specific. And working that fast forced me to develop a certain amount of skill in determining what is important and what's not. And a lot of that was on a subconscious level. I was less conscious of it as I was making those marks. But then as I analyzed those sketches, it got me to think about, well, how important is it to actually draw the head in creating a gesture? How important is it to get the feet or the hands? So I would play around with that, but, with some, I would just do kind of a loose gesture for the head, but I'd spend a little bit more time on the feet. In some, I would look at, spend more time on the head and just let the figure fade away and try to see, well, what does that ultimately capture? So kind of going back to where I was originally starting, again, if you're limited on time, try a quick gesture drawing and do. So you could do that with this drawing. Instead of doing one long drawing, do 50 1-minute quick gestures. Give yourself, set a little timer, 1 minute, and you just go for it. Grab a piece, grab a whole stack of printer paper. It doesn't have to be good paper or newsprint or something, and just go to town. And then try doing a finished drawing from that and see what you learn about the subject. I have found over the years that that mindset in general has helped lead to many kind of real profound growth moments in my work. So. All right. Is the picture blurry? Oh, no. Hopefully, I am moving very quickly. I just thought of that. So I'm moving very quickly, which can sometimes really be confusing to YouTube and OBS that I'm streaming through. So I didn't consider that as I kind of formulated my thoughts around this show. So I apologize if it's just coming through all blurry, but that is my system trying to keep up with the fast emotions. Okay. Gonna wipe this down a little bit. So thank you, Artist Network. Yeah, these are the oil-impregnated jumbo jet pencils from Jerry's Artarama. Love them. I've got the white, black, and this, is this the sepia? Yeah, sepia. And they also have they have this one here, the sanguine, but I haven't used that one yet. I just chose these three. There's a little bit of a warmth to this that I don't think the camera is quite capturing, but this is really a bit of an umber quality. Okay. So as I'm going to go through, I see these figures here that are really small, but if I focus on them, they appear large. Oh, Adita is saying on YouTube there's a 90-minute challenge. Sketch 5 1 minute and 5 2 minute, etc. That is awesome. Those are great. Great to do. And I think a figure is a great subject to focus on for gesture. But that, you know, that we sometimes kind of default to drawing figures when we're thinking about gestural work. But you know, you just know that, you know, a gesture can really be capturing any subject. You can work with any subject. I do a lot of quick gestures of landscapes when I'm out in the field, just to kind of warm myself up before I start painting. And what I'll do is I'll just do that right on the panel I'm painting on. At this stage too, I'm also kind of looking through blurred vision. I'm letting my eyes just simply relax, lose focus a little bit. Right now, I'm really trying to pay attention out again to my peripheral vision, looking at the angles that I'm seeing. I can bring this down. Kind of a quick placement of the door, somewhat relative to the figure. I think I need to adjust the scale of the figure. And if you're kind of worried about kind of gestural drawing and it just becoming a mess, you know, and play around with the pressure of your work. Again, I'm holding the pencil really far back. And that helps to adjust the pressure a bit. And so if you notice that you're a bit heavy-handed, and part of what I'm doing as well is I know that that this is the lighter value. I'm going to be coming back in with a darker value a bit later as well. And so now there's a kind of a change of pace in my marks, where I'm trying to be a little bit more deliberate. And one of the things that it just becomes kind of natural for me is to think about drawing lines from the length of the pencil, dragging this way rather than switching to a tripod grip and drawing with the point, and then trying to capture shape using these kind of vertical marks using the broadside. So it's really like I've got this essentially this T formation with the way I'm holding the pencil. So kind of a line this way. And we'll see how this turns out. This could be a beautiful failure. You can see everything just fall apart. You know, I've had a few of those here that I question, like, what just happened there? But again, I'm trying not to overthink things. And there's again, I'm just trying to react to it as much as possible. Again, and the objective to that is to see if there's something I can discover in the process, something about either the way the drawing develops, the way I'm using the materials, etc., that can open doors for me. I think it's just time to shake things up a little bit. I'm definitely certainly at the point in my drawing where I get excited for failures. It was really intimidating at first. I did not feel safe failing. My identity was too wrapped up in trying to get things right. But now there's a really nice feeling you get when you discover something new out of as an accident on something that fails. All right. So I'm switching to this tripod grip to give a little bit more form and structure to the Gondolier here. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at the kind of the primary angles, and I'm trying to be deliberate, try to visualize the mark in the head before I execute, and then strike. And looking at the leg, for example, you could see that it's broken down by a lot of these short, quick marks. And it can be helpful sometimes to kind of visualize the start and the end of your marks before you strike it. So if you're not feeling a certain amount of confidence in your marks, then take some time to again kind of plot it out, almost kind of connect the dots in a little bit. So if I'm looking at this stretch here, I'm looking at that bit on the armpit, I'm looking at the belt here, and then if I'm analyzing that curve, it's not a straight line. It's kind of this compound curve that kind of comes in a little bit. At the bottom, it curves out a little bit, right? So there's a certain amount of nuance to it, and I know right off the bat though that I'm gonna be having to do this more than once. This is all gonna get messed up. You can see I'm picking up some material here on my arm. And now it's kind of recalling some of the things we talked about in the Degas episode. So if you haven't watched that, that could be a good episode to really think about gesture and line and contour marks. So it's requiring a little bit of thought here. These marks are going to be fairly light, but they should stay visible. I don't really know the structure of the head, and what I'm worried about right now is if I just draw like an oval, it's going to be a bit too generic. But I need to study that a little bit more, and since I don't have that understanding, I got to that point, and little red flags kind of popped up, and I said, "All right, I'm gonna set this aside for now, and then move along." I feel generally pretty good about the overall gesture of the figure right now, and I can block in some of the light and shadow using some of this parallel hatching. That's one of the things that we looked at in Degas' work as well. And now I can move on. I can move on to some other parts. So now there's the back of the seat, this really ornate looking thing. So I'm going to try to move on to that. I'm going to use the side of the pencil and represent that in a combination of line and shape. So back to this kind of sideways hold, this overhand grip, where I can move between drawing a shape and drawing line. And definitely if you're feeling kind of less confidence than you would like in your marks, take some time to just move over the paper. All right, just float over and kind of visualize the marks in your head. Try to get the movement of the pencil. You're basically just practicing. There's this shadow here, and I can use some parallel hatching here. I noticed there's a hat there that I didn't notice before, so I'm going to put that in my kind of mental bank. Okay, thank you. I'm assuming that's Jen. Thank you for posting that Degas video. If anybody missed it, we'll be doing working on Michelangelo next week. The study of a torso of Michelangelo. So doing some more figure drawing. So now I'm kind of in this area that gets really complex, and there's a part of me that's freaking out right now. So what am I going to do? I am going to slow things down and focus on shape. So whenever you're painting, whether you're drawing, you can be either moving forward by the subject or by the form, by the design of it. So I want to be more design forward in my thinking. So what I mean by that is thinking more about the abstract qualities of these shapes rather than thinking about it as figures sitting in that space. And so you can, if it's helpful, you can be thinking about just as this whole scene as being a series of abstract forms, or you can be really thinking closely about the what it is you're looking at, but really breaking it down analytically. This curve, it's tricky. I really want to rotate the paper right now because that'll be so much easier to create that curve if I could just go like this, and I can't. So what I'm doing is I'm just kind of practicing some of these marks, try to get a feel for that overall curve. For those of you that have been with the show for a while, how is this? I just want to kind of throw it out for some observations. See how this is all kind of connecting with you. I feel like hopefully this is enough of a different approach to give us something new to consider. Do you see if I'm falling into any of perhaps old habits that I may not be aware of? You all know my drawing process differently than I know it myself. So this is why drawing together can be helpful, because the people that you trust to give you feedback can often really give you something that moves you forward. Just looking at these poles here. Thinking about the height relative to the height of the head there. And there's these two here. What can I imply? Will be a really important question to ask. I'm going to reestablish this shadow. And go right over that, because I don't want to get fussy. want that shadow to feel like a continuation, so I'm going right over that figure. Getting a little bit light when I pass over the figure, but still just passing right over. And part of what, working kind of more loosely, more gesturally, part of the skill that it can develop is being able to recognize, what the marks are, giving the viewer. So what I mean by that is that, our brains are perfectly designed organisms that are looking to make sense of stuff. If you give it enough information, the brain will create pictures. It'll just start to invent things that it expects to be there. So we can use the viewer's own natural mental ability to suggest things that we don't actually have to draw. So I'm thinking about the waves, for example, here, just moving quickly across the surface and then paying attention to, well, what is appearing on the page, and can it be interpreted as water? Something that can help to get to that point is to kind of shift that thinking into design-centric approaches. Be thinking about the forms as abstractions. All right, so let me see. I feel like we've got a good overall foundation here. Unify things a little bit, particularly around the edges. Going to switch. I got in the habit of using that sepia when I need to bring out the dark one. Okay, I just want to get back to the questions here. What made me choose this reference? There were a lot of Venetian photos that I could have chosen. I think ultimately why I chose this is the gesture of the figure and the structure of the gondola. So I like that angle that allows us to see two dimensions of it clearly. We understand the three-dimensionality of it, but we can really see the one side plus the top. So it gives us the information we need to really understand the structure. I like the gesture of the figure. The faces aren't all that prominent, so we don't get bogged down in that. Compositionally, I like this kind of triangle that was kind of created there, but that's less of a reason. But that's really why. And it was also something a little bit more simple. So many of the scenes I saw, you have ornate bridges and you have lots of buildings, and they were beautiful. And I thought, well, what if we simplify it a little bit, and this the structure of the boat, the gesture of the figure becomes really the primary focal point. And let's really try to sink our teeth into that. So as Cynthia is saying, is the angle of the shoulder right too steep? Probably, yes. I'll need to be correcting this as I go. And so when I bring out the eraser and my white charcoal, I'll be able to adjust. But thank you for pointing that out, because I do need to revisit that. Okay. Oh, Christine has a really good question about what is the meaning of abstract. I kind of throw that word around there, but it's fairly abstract. The way I think about abstraction is kind of like the pure raw data of the information. So, for example, there's if we're thinking about rendering a subject, and we're really thinking closely about the form and the value, the anatomy of the structure, that moves us away from abstraction. Abstraction becomes a kind of a delabeling, stripping away the definitions, so they're purely shapes and values and colors. So if you were to imagine you've never seen any of these objects before, you have no point of reference to them, you don't have words to describe them, that gets you to an understanding of the abstraction of things, right? And I guess that's probably the way that I think about it the most. Often abstractions express kind of feelings and the intangible. And it also, it's about leaning into the raw materials to express something that's emotional, that triggers something in the mind. That can be a quality of abstraction as well. But again, that's where, when drawing together, if anybody has anything to contribute to totally tell me I'm wrong. So I'm probably gonna go back in and rework some of these lines repeatedly. Nia is asking, could you show us the Soho gray toned paper? It is on the other side of the room. I'm sorry. But that's what I used last week. They make the smaller sketch pads, and they're starting to make some larger ones as well, but I don't know when they'll be available. So, Marjorie, this is the Somerset rag paper. It's a gray toned paper. And what I'm using are the Jerry's Artarama jumbo pencils. So I've got the white, I've got the sepia, and I've got the jet black. So I've been using the sepia for most of the drawing, and now I'm switching over to the jet black to kind of finish it up in the white. Do you think soft watercolor paper would work with graphite? I've had mixed results with watercolor paper. Sometimes it'll really hold the material, sometimes it'll really lift. If you have a scrap that you can test it out on, go for it and just see how it lifts some of the material. I've done some drawings that I've been really happy with when working with watercolor, and then I've created some that I've been really fighting against it. So a lot of it depends on the type, the brand, the weight, all of those things. Okay. And Peter Frost, will I draw a sunset? I'd be happy to draw another sunset. There is one that I did very early on. I can't remember the episode number, but I did draw a sunset. In the front of the boat, is this too long? I ask myself. Could be. I may be adjusting the proportions. So what we can look at, if we're looking at basic proportions, try to establish the relationship between the left, the front of the boat and the figure, the back of the boat and the figure, and you can compare that to the image. And actually, it looks like it's just about right. So this should be a little bit wider than this distance here, if that makes sense. So pretty close. And there should be a bit of an angle. What I have is I have it tilted the wrong way. So if I were to visualize this line here, see how it's slanting upward, and based on the photo, it should be slanting downward, and that could be affecting things significantly. So let's figure that out. Now, I'm not afraid of leaving some of these marks on the page at this point. So really the top should be right about here. A drawing, to me, the drawings that I really respond to the most are ones that show evidence of their development. We're not hiding all the quote-unquote mistakes or early marks, but that's just me. What I love about drawing is that everybody has a different approach to it. But there's something in any drawing that kind of captures something kind of pure in the relationship between the artist and the marks on the page. And that feels a little bit better. I'll wipe this down. Part of that wiping down that I do it's not necessarily calculated all the time. It's become just habit. So I don't know as if I really have good reason for doing it all the time. Going back to that question about abstraction too, is one of the things you might be evaluating if you're kind of leaning into the abstract quality of things, what you might respond to is just simply the beauty of a mark, the beauty of a shape. Not does it represent the object accurately, but does it express something that I'm responding to? And you may not have an answer to what it is you're responding to, but you're just taking note of a response. What I like about visual art is that you can separate it from language and kind of respond to things on a different level. I think there's a lot of power in words, and I love the way words can be used, but I also like to consider, again, the things that can be expressed through art that maybe are expressed best without them, or if words feel kind of insufficient for describing a response to something visual. And so, again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying early in the drawing. If you have a kind of in your mind a threshold for accuracy that you're using to evaluate your marks, it can be helpful to understand that as you lead into the drawing. So, for example, I have determined going into this that accuracy, getting the proportions right, the angles right, is less important than creating marks that I find visually interesting and capturing something gestural in the scene. Having said that, though, I've caught myself correcting a few times now, and through some of the observations that you've thrown out in the audience there, that there is some correction happening, but I need to kind of keep myself grounded a bit on, with regards to that. Maybe not correcting sometimes, or before I make a correction, ask myself, this may not be an accurate mark, but is it the right mark for the drawing? And that, again, that's the beauty in art making, is that what's right for you might be totally different than what's right for me. So just going to keep going darker. So far this is really going darker than the preparatory sketch that I had, and I like that. I think I want this to be brighter in here, so I'll be lifting that with the eraser soon. Now I'm totally losing some of these marks that I'll have to reestablish later. I'm not concerned about precision along those edges. This is where I can correct that shoulder. I forget who pointed that out, but I do feel like getting something right in the shoulder is going to be important. So I want to change the direction of my marks to help reinforce the structure. It's really kind of getting blown out there. Oh, the light has changed outside. That's what's happened. There, that's better. We had some nice snow this morning here in Colorado. Now the sun's come out. Hope everybody's staying warm. I know we had, 4 below this morning, so always good when it's below 0. Although I take this, I lived in Alaska for several years for graduate school, and it would often hit 40, 50 below. So I can't complain at 4 below. All right, just going to keep going darker. Just kind of focusing on that landscape, essentially, is setting the stage. I'm trying to think about what I might be kind of learning throughout this process, if there's anything new that I'm discovering. And starting to see what I respond to in here. There's something about the atmosphere that I'm really digging. Okay, I'm going to kind of work on the shoulder a little bit. When I think about the gestures, I do try to break up the marks as much as possible. You can convey a lot of information through a series of essentially connect the dots, like you're just kind of tapping along the contour. And then maybe going back and refining. So I'm tightening up a little bit in here. So switching between, thinking about the line, thinking about the shape. And I think I dropped that shoulder down too much. Let's see how this works. But I'm also thinking about, really trying to break those lines. You don't necessarily need clean lines to convey information, unless that's something that, is just, something that you are particularly drawn to. Let's see. All right, so I'm seeing some really good comments there. Thank you, Jim. Seeing some comments about the boat. Yeah, I'll need to adjust that. It sounds like. We'll see how things feel. Like if something feels off and along here, but I'm going to get back to kind of establishing the gesture of this figure here. And here now you can see I'm using some parallel hatching to establish light and shadow. And I'm intentionally moving in this direction from lower left to upper right and lifting off. The light's coming in from this direction, and it just creates a softer transition. So I can be a little less kind of persnickety with the way the pencil is landing on the page, and I'm just kind of following down the length of the leg. And I'm doing that. I have a bit of a guide for that leg, but I'm doing that before I really redefine that gesture. And you might think about, if you look at this leg, for example, I've got a line here, and then it transitions to shape. There's no real line defining that edge, and then it just kind of fades off. And then we have this other leg here. You might think about kind of weaving line and shape together to find something that works for you. And now I can really refine this leg. And then this leg comes out in front just slightly. And in order to capture that, you got to really think about the contrast between those two angles. I need to kind of close that off a little bit. So this parallel hatching, again, this is something that we saw in Degas' work when we worked on that master copy. I don't know if there's something still feels off. So I may have to continue to refine that leg. But that's, again, part of the things that we'll have to figure out is like, what are we going to sacrifice? What's the threshold? Does it feel like we captured something with that form? Does it need to be fixed? And now as I'm going through here, now, if you remember, we've already drawn this section of the boat. It's all kind of wiped out now. So now we get to go back through and do it again. And now that we've got that bit of muscle memory, hopefully we'll know how to do it again, right? And we'll do it again with a little greater accuracy. But this does kind of raise questions about that. I get often from students when I would teach on ground is to discuss style and what that means, and is it important to define your style? And I know there are many different opinions out there. I personally don't spend any time thinking about what my style is. It doesn't mean that there isn't something that's being conveyed. I just feel like style is something that we can't really avoid. It becomes inherent in how we work. So if I focus on line, shape, form, value, texture, if I focus on the process I'm using for building a drawing or a painting, style comes through in my natural body language. And you can't really avoid it. But I know, some artists who emphasize that quite a bit, and that becomes a critical part of their artistic practice. So there's more than one way to make it in this crazy world. Whew. Had to think about that for a little while. I was a little bit focused on the thinking. A snake or a frog, that would be awesome. All right, Cynthia, I'm glad the angle sighting has been working for you. Yeah, so I'm seeing some really good back and forth there, so I hope I'm not missing any questions. But I love seeing that there's some good conversation happening. Yeah, the figure could be a bit big. I feel like I drew the figure too wide. Which could be the case. But we'll see. Sometimes you end up just leaving things because you like the marks. I don't know if I'm at that stage right now. All right, there's a little bit of this reflection of the door here. The door comes up. Kind of feel out the arch of that door. Feel out the perspective of the window. So one of the things that can be helpful is to observe that your eye level is really pretty much right in level with the eyes of the figure. So what that means is that looking at the structure of the building, you could visualize an implied line that's perfectly horizontal. And so then the windows, the bases of the buildings that are below that horizontal line, below that eye level, are going to start to radiate down like this, right? They're going to angle downward a little bit. As you go above that line, they're going to angle in the opposite direction. So if you imagine a vanishing point far off to the left, they would be appearing to converge off to the left there. So I don't think it's worth it to kind of calculate out where that vanishing point is, but if you simply have a base understanding of the general angles there, it can help you become aware of some subtle differences that could help make that whole scene come together. So for example, as I look at this window here, this window is slightly below eye level. As we move up, then the windows are above eye level and they angle in the opposite direction. And you can see I'm being very imprecise with my marks here, but I'm trying to get the general structure. This is one of the things I focused on in the perspective drawing course I have on Artist Network, is how to build an intuitive understanding for perspective. So then, if you want to really get into measuring and calculating, if you like the precision, you can. If not, if you want to be able to simply react to forms in the environment and create something that at least doesn't look totally out of place, and you can do that as well. All right, so you can see that I'm not going overboard in terms of representing these windows, just trying to suggest them. A few quick marks hopefully will help to pull this thing together. All right, Barb, I like your comments there. Peter Frost on Instagram, you can find me at Scott L. Maier. So SCOTT and then L, I think it's .L, .Maier, M-A-I-E-R. A few of you have found me there, which is awesome. But if you're new, what you're watching is Drawing Together with Artist Network. My name's Scott Maier, and we do this every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, because we like to draw. It's important to take time out of our busy days to draw. And not just so that we become better artists, but I need this for my brain to function properly. I don't know as if I've really experienced a level of focus in any other activity like I have with drawing and painting. And that to me is really the value on a personal level. It's just that it's a form of like hypnosis in a way. My brain just feels like it comes together. All right, and you can see I'm avoiding the head. And I recognize that because it's intimidating, and I don't really know why, but I haven't figured it out. I can feel I'm still working on it in the background in my mind here, but I don't know what I'm doing with it. And I'm going to keep going darker. I know in the back of my mind I'm calibrating to these values here. That's something we haven't really talked about. I've started on a toned paper so it's not bright white. You can kind of compare that to how bright the white tape is. You see little bits of that there. And also, as we sit with values and colors, we calibrate our understanding of them into the environment. And we have a tendency to kind of assign certain qualities to colors and values. So for example, I look here and I'm assigning that as black, and I might be even able to go darker. I'm assigning this as white when we can certainly go lighter. And so because of that, then we are seeing values differently. And everything is going to change when I introduce lighter values. But in the spirit of trying to keep things gestural, I'm just going to try to keep things moving. I'm going to flip this over. You can see I've really dulled my point here. So I'm going to draw on the side of the pencil for a little while and then see if I can sharpen up that point. You can still get sharp lines just using the side of the pencil. It's just kind of in my nature of working, and it's probably a habit I need to address, is I have a tendency to kind of avoid doing things that I know are important, like changing brushes when I'm painting or sharpening a pencil, fighting against things because I get lazy. I don't know if anybody else has that experience, but man, oh man, that's been something I've struggled with throughout my entire time as an artist, having to kind of go through the process of chastising myself and say, can you just stop and change your brush? You know, put more paint on the palette, sharpen your pencil, you know, do the things you know you need to do, but you're just, I don't know, for whatever reason, it just doesn't happen. I don't know about you all, but that's me. But I'm going to see how far I can push it. Let's see, because I'm still able to get the sharp lines, so I don't really feel like I need that. I don't feel like I need the pencil sharpener at this stage. And one thing it might be helpful to think about as I'm making these lines, rolling the pencil becomes something that it becomes second nature. So as I score that line, for example, I'm rolling it in my fingers as I go down it. And that helps to kind of distribute the material a little bit more evenly. And it can create a really interesting mark sometimes. Sometimes it just doesn't work and I have to do it again. But, you know, as soon as I feel like I can't fix something in my artwork, it changes how I approach things. So I try to enter every drawing, every painting without the fear that I can't fix anything. You know, there's nothing I can do that I can't correct in some way. Now, that may not literally be the truth, but there's something in the mindset that really I tighten up if I feel like I have to be precious with anything. And I don't like that feeling. And I'm kind of moving left and right sides of the boat, working them together. I'm going to try to figure out this gentleman here. Looks like he's having a grand old time, looking right at the camera. And what I'm prioritizing are just simply the darker shapes. And I'm going to try to see them as abstract shapes. I did not give myself a whole lot of room for the lady there sitting in front of him. I may have made this thing too large. Let's see how this holds up. I have to ask myself, do I need to correct that or not? Okay. So just doing a little bit more kind of calculating. And I think that's a kind of a critical line here. You don't see a whole lot of it, but there's this kind of triangular form here that shows the surface plane of the boat. That's giving a lot of the dimension. It comes around here, and we really see a lot of it now. There's this central ridge right along here, and there's a bit of a slope, right? And that affects the overall shape, and that gets a little bit confusing. But let's see. One of the tools you can use to evaluate whether or not you really need to render something is squinting. You know, if you squint your eyes and something disappears, what it tells you is that the values are close together, and perhaps the detail is not quite as important as it as you might think otherwise. So I'm seeing obvious differences in the overall proportions. And again, I think I need to stick to my guns. This is the dangerous part right now. I started this whole drawing thinking this is all about gesture and speed, not overthinking it. Now I'm questioning it because I want to fix it, because I want to make it look right to all of you. And so I have to go back to my initial statement and remind myself, hey, stay focused on the initial objective. And this could all turn to crap. Maybe this may not come together. That's okay. And then we'll have learned something. Maybe there's something else in here. And this is an important thing too that I want to I want to kind of discuss as we were talking about evaluating work. I think it's equally as important to identify what you could improve as well as what you're doing right. And I think both of those are really important. I know for myself, I've completed some drawings with undeserved confidence. I complete them and I'm thinking I am killing it. And all that did was it prevented me from seeing obvious flaws in the work. And by the same token, I've completed drawings and I said, I have no right to be an artist. This is so bad, right? And that prevented me from seeing the good things that were happening. So my goal generally is objectivity. Over 25 years of drawing, I try to strip that away, try to identify what is working, what is not working, carry that with you into the next drawing. And it's really important to focus on what you're doing right, what you're happy with. And you could say this whole drawing has fallen apart, but there's this one part that's important, and I want to carry that on. And that allows you to intentionally move into the next drawing and carry that forward. Identify what could be improved and try to figure out, well, what would I do differently? If you don't know, that's okay. Just having that clear vision could be really important. And I say that because one of the things that it's really easy to happen is to identify, say, this doesn't look right, but it's hard to know, well, what about it doesn't look right? That's so much of the skill in drawing, is giving yourself an opportunity to determine those things. It's like, I think about it as with an actor, right? You're like as an actor, you can prepare and you can learn your lines, but it's really when you're in the scene that you really have to put it all to the test, and then you have to evaluate and figure out how to improve. And the same with drawing is that you can do a lot in your head, you could be thinking about it a lot, but so much is going to happen in response to what you actually do on the page. So the more you can draw, the better. The more you can draw with intention, the better. And again, try to identify what you're feeling good about and what can be improved with a certain amount of objectivity. At least that's the way I've kind of navigate this crazy life of being an artist. That blue stripe pole, I don't want to deal with it. So I'm not. I'm just going to make it another pole. This is definitely one place in the world that I would very much like to see. So. All right. Yeah, remember, yeah, she got cropped out. I think I made this, I think I moved the woman there. She's just kind of sitting back behind the seat a little bit more. I'm imagining this world where she's kind of just leaning back into it. So there you have it. I generally don't I don't make intentional adjustments like that. All right, I'm gonna go deeper into the values here. Okay, thinking about the water. Okay, so as I'm thinking about the water here, there's so many shapes. Try to react gesturally to it. And I find that with things like water, if we suggest the form, it becomes perhaps a bit more effective than trying to get really literal and precise with these edges. And it's often kind of it's about changing the angle, where earlier I was holding the pencil at kind of this right angle to my hand, creating these thin lines and broad strokes. If you turn it to like a 45-degree angle, but you're moving sideways, kind of rolling in your fingers, you can create these kind of wedge-like forms that help to create the look of the darker parts in these waves. And then just simply notice the overall change in scale that helps to create the depth. So we're understanding the depth across the surface of this water, not really because of a value shift. There's some brighter lights here, but you see some nice highlights there. You see some nice highlights here. The darks are kind of dark here, they're dark here. So it's not really contrast that's creating that depth. It's the scale of the marks that's giving us the understanding of that depth. So if we look at all the ripples in the water, they're just these smaller marks that are closer together. And they open up as we come down into the foreground. And now, we're looking across the surface here. We're looking down at the surface here. I gotta get this thing in there, the ore, or whatever the... Let's see if that looks right. So drawing straight lines, if that's intimidating, you can see I use an overhand grip for that. I find that that's more effective in creating a straight line than this tripod grip. You have this natural curve to the fingers and the wrist when you hold it this way. And that's really difficult to make a straight line with that. But if you use the vertical nature of the pencil as a guide and an overhand grip, and you pull down from the shoulder, it can often be a little bit easier. And I'm stabilizing with these fingers here. These are resting on the page as well, so I feel very secure in that mark. And there's just a bit of that ore showing through the water there that changes the angle. And we'll be pulling out the eraser pretty soon, and I think that's going to help us to really pull this thing together. I want to get this flag thingy. Okay. All right, Deborah got some good feedback from the husband. That's awesome. Let's see. All right, thank you, everybody. I hope I didn't miss any questions. I kind of forgot about the chat there. So if I missed a question that you want me to answer, please type it out again. Okay, let's get back to it. And I think what I want to do is I want to revisit this guy's legs. And then the light and shadow there. I gotta go darker on that light side, darker on the shadow side. That feels a little better. Just kind of suggest some of the pattern on here. I don't want to draw it. I want to really render it. All right. How am I feeling? I don't know how I'm feeling. I got to get this guy's head. I can't put it off any longer. So, and what I'm going to do is start by looking at some of this negative space in here. See what that does. So just there's that little bit of that window that's poking out on the side of his neck there. There is a bit on the glasses. So I'm just going to do a little bit at a time, see how this thing comes together. So maybe that shadow. So I'm starting from the kind of the inside out now. As what I've struggled in the past is overstating some of this stuff, especially heads and hands. So I'm going to try to suggest some of the stripes there. You can see where it's going into the light. I'm lightening up, really kind of trying to suggest that stripe pattern, but I'm not going to be too precise with it. And the reason is it's kind of like when I don't know if you've created a drawing that might have text in it, like a sign on the street or the title of a book. It's really easy for the stripes like this, if they're overstated, to really pop off the page and degrade the form, make it confusing to understand the form. And so I'm only adding stripes. I'm just going kind of tentatively because I want to find that balance where it reads as the red and white stripes while also enhancing the form. All right, and I think I need now the eraser. He's got this nice shiny spot in his head. So rather than draw that line, which could come across as clumsy, I'm going to lift off the light side of his head and kind of wrap around. Wrap around there a little bit, and then I can add the white pencil here to pull out the highlights even more. There's a little light catching on his sleeve and catching on his arm, and I just want to suggest. This is another opportunity to kind of correct that shoulder that I don't think I still don't think is working quite right. And there's a little bit of light catching on the arm here. All right, now there's this light catching on this ore, so I'm going to use my eraser here, the kind of the flat side of this chiseled eraser. It's going to be a little tricky, so I'm stabilizing it in this kind of modified grip. So this finger is resting on the page, and my goal is to lock the wrist and draw from the shoulder, just like I did when I scribed this line here. And so here we go. Let's see how that didn't do a whole lot. So I need to actually, what it shows me is that I need to move I need to give a little bit of vibration to the eraser here. see how that works. All right, now there's this white embellishment there. There's this one here that's catching the light. Ooh. Takes a little bit of work to get that here, because there's so much of that material on the surface. So I might have to finish that up with the white jumbo pencil. All right, so I just want to clean up this edge. Now there's this light kind of aluminum edge that I'm going to try to capture. It's going to sharpen up the edge, but I'm just using a lighter pressure here so that it doesn't create highlights that compete with that. Although, again, we have the white pencil that will help us with some of those highlights. This just helps us to define some of the edges. I can sharpen this up a little bit. Right down in here, we start to get some of these lighter highlights. All right, so if we move to the water, you know, so just like I used the charcoal or the pencil in this kind of at this kind of angle, I'm doing the same with the eraser. I'll lift off some of there, and you get these. I don't even really know how to describe those the shapes, but they feel more kind of naturally formed. Now the trick here, though, one of the things that I had to really kind of overcome early on is the desire to create a repeated pattern, and so I try to kind of make a deliberate mark and then move on, make another deliberate mark that's different from the first one, rather than repeating the same mark over and over again. And then it makes it a little bit easier to accept as kind of naturally formed. And again, as we recede, the marks get kind of smaller and tighter together. So that's really all I'm thinking about is, really, what is the direction of the shape I need to make? And is it a big one or is it a small one? Is it close together? And create marks that are varied. And then pretty soon we'll bring out the white drawing material, the drawing pencil there. All right, actually, I want to sharpen up the figure a little bit along the edges here and here. Now, looking at the edges, edge variation gets really important in some areas. So if you're trying to create depth, what you're looking for is, as you follow along the contour of an object, that there's something changing all the time. The more variation you have, the more depth you'll be able to suggest. Kind of erase out this guy's jacket. So just looking at basic shapes of light and shadow. So if I were to outline his cap, that would actually bring that out too much. So I'm going to keep that just as really an edge between light and shadow. Jane is asking about the eraser. Yeah, this is this Derwent retractable eraser. I think you can get replacement pieces for it, but that's what I'm using. It's just a white rubber eraser. This might bring it into focus a little bit more. And in order to get that sharp point, I simply take a razor blade and I kind of just cut off a nice fresh tip. I do that with all my razors. I kind of cut them to bits, and it's probably wasteful, but it gets me the edges that I need, and so it makes the erasers more useful for me. I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, I want to get a little bit of light here on the trees. So I was really impressed with these. These are the Jerry's Artarama Jumbo pencils. So they're impregnated with oil. And I am really impressed with how they lift. I was not expecting that when I started working with them. So fun material to use. I think it'll definitely be part of my sketch box there when I go out in the field. I feel like what I want to do is give a little bit more structure, give something on this side to bring it up, not to finish, but make it not distractingly unfinished. Let's see how that works. Okay. Sorry, I'm just a little focused there, so less talking than I might normally. I do like this. Broken lines are beautiful things. I love them. Edie, I'm glad to hear that the live chat is helpful for you. Yeah, like mad moments go. Yeah, I just wasted that eraser. I just lost a whole 1/16 of an inch. But I don't know. There's definitely a time when I would cringe at wasting anything. And now I have too many art materials. I'm going to change the shape here of that cresting wave. I think I want to create a little bit more contrast in here to capture the belly of that boat a little bit more. So I'm going to go really dark and carry that around here and get a little bit of that reflection up in that side. Actually, I think what I want to do is I really like the way this aluminum looks like aluminum stripe kind of comes through. So I'm just going to use the eraser to kind of feel that out a little bit. I'm not worried about it being super clean, because if it's too defined, it's going to, again, degrade the form a little bit. So I want to use it to enhance the form, not detract from it. And if we sharpen it too much, it could become a bit of a distraction. And then what I'm looking at here is it's really easy. There's part of me that really wants to define the edge of that boat, especially along that water line. But when looking at that structure, the way the light is bouncing off, the water is reflecting off the surface, it's really actually difficult to see where that is. So I don't want to invent something that I don't know to be there, and especially if you contrast it to this, which is much more visible, this section of the boat. So it's kind of what I'm thinking there. Actually, yeah. So lifting that off, lightening this a little bit more. What I just did there, though, making this line that's parallel to the bottom of the boat, It's dangerous. That's going to flatten things out. What I need to do is have a kind of a clean overlap. So run these lines in a way that cuts behind that form to open up that space, hopefully pull that out a little bit more. I'm going to use overlapping here a bit more. So I want to just be mindful of some of these light areas carrying through behind there. Because right now it feels a bit flat. So if I go like this, if I isolate that section from the rest of the boat, especially if I cut up the figure, this thing is popping forward, right? The water is coming forward, not this. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go right over that boat to make sure that there really is a nice clean pass through of some of those highlighted areas. And the same with this oar. Really bring that through. And I can do that with the figure as well. So now I've just gone right over those. And now it's easy for me to just simply reestablish that edge if I lost anything there. I'm going to draw that line again. And I can clean anything out here up that I might have messed up with the eraser. And I feel like that works a little bit better. The overlapping is a really powerful tool when creating depth. And so it's something that I pay attention to quite a bit, making sure there's a nice clean overlap when necessary. Okay, so now let's bring in, I got probably about 10-15 minutes left on this drawing. I'm going to lift off some of these areas where I want the highlights to be a little bit stronger. I kind of like the way the light catches on the edge of this, the seat here. So I'm lifting off some of that, and then I'll be coming in with the white material. So now I have this. Now this, it's bright, but not super intense. And again, as I did with the eraser, I'm kind of sneaking up on the form of the head rather than trying to over-define it. I want to suggest it. If I over-define it, it just becomes clumsy and it feels like a kind of a cartoon head, and I don't want that. And I get a little bit here of the light on the shoulder. And I need to bring this up a little bit. That was not a good mark. I'm going to cut that out a little bit. All right, now let's see how this works. This isn't as bright as, say, the bright white of a paper, but hopefully there's enough contrast against the gray tone to really kind of show off some of these lights. It's not really working. So what happens is if you don't have the bare paper, the white just kind of mixes with the black underneath and gets kind of a muddy gray. So you might have to lift with the eraser first. Let me see. All right, how's this doing? I asked myself. Yeah, I don't think I need much more of the white. See, maybe a little bit down in here. You can use the white to kind of refine an edge a little bit if you need to. And maybe pull out a little bit of the white foam here that's catching the light. A little pass through there. All right. I think if I were on location sketching, if I could tell these people to just stop in place for 2 hours, I'd call it done. But, you know, hopefully this was something. You know, so the intention here was to try to loosen up, see if I can learn anything. One of the things that I feel is present here that is perhaps less so in some of the other drawings is just more of those looser marks in there, a greater variety of marks. So some areas that are of more refinement and others that are less. And hopefully it captures the spirit and the motion of the scene a bit more. You know, so I don't know. We'll see what next week. And so next week, again, is the master copy of Michelangelo. That'll be totally different. So in that episode, it's all about trying to decode the marks to put ourselves in the mind of Michelangelo. So what can we learn about his thought process, the way he develops a drawing, the way he reacts to form, it's just by analyzing those marks and trying to replicate those marks. It's not about creating a photographic reproduction. It's about recreating the process that led to the creation of that work through evidence that we interpret on the page. So hopefully that makes sense. I look forward to seeing you next week. I'm going to call it a day here. Let me switch back to this big scene. So thank you all for joining me. As always, Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, where we meet live to draw together. My name is Scott Maier. I want you to come back next week. If you are new, I welcome you. You'll find a link in the top of the chat and in the description below where you can share your work when you're done if you're following along. You can also find all 133 other episodes in the series, so feel free to jump in wherever, find a subject that is calling to you, sit down and draw that, you know, take some time out of your busy day to dedicate to drawing, bring yourself into focus, have fun making marks. And remember, you don't have to share any of this work with anybody. So if you're intimidated, if you're scared about anything and you think it's all going to fall apart, that's fine. That's what you want. You want your drawing to fall apart. You don't have to share it. It's yours. It's your experience. But if you find that creative partner that can give you the feedback that really helps you move along, there's a lot of value in that. So if you can find somebody to draw along with you, that's even better. So thank you all. Have a fantastic weekend, and I look forward to drawing with you next week.